Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're here to talk about professional learning or professional development, and how to really reimagine that in acknowledgement of how things have changed and are changing, and how professional development or professional like. So we will be sharing a little bit about our work in that area, but then also spend a good amount of our time together really discussing and hearing from you all as well. So my name is Emily Poster. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a STEM education manager at the Science Museum of Minnesota. And my colleague Mahmoud will introduce himself as well.
Hello, my name is Mahmoud Aliamer. I use he, him pronouns. I am a learning and instruction specialist in the STEM Ed department here at the Science Museum of Minnesota. Thanks for being here with us today.
And Mahmoud and I both do quite a bit of facilitation of professional development and development of modules for learning around CT for teachers. And so we'd like to hear from all of you too, to get a sense of who's in the space. So I'd like to invite everyone to take a moment, unmute, and share your name, where you're joining us from, and what is your role with professional development or professional learning, whether that's a facilitator, a participant, or something else. And so if people would just one by one unmute, otherwise we can put an order in the chat if needed, but I invite you to just share with us.
I can start. My name is Emily Keesbo Johnson, and I'm coming from St. Paul Public Schools. I work in their Office of Teaching and Learning on the digital learning team. So a mixture of teacher coaching and providing professional learning for our teachers.
Thank you, Emily. I'd like to go next. Okay, I will just drop an order in the chat of just the order I'm seeing people's names on my screen. And if you would just take a moment to introduce yourselves, be really great. Amanda, would you go next? Oh, thank you. Okay, Dana?
I can go. This is Kelly Meister. I'm a STEM and CT specialist at the Science Museum.
Thanks, Kelly.
I can go now. Sorry, I needed to figure out how to stop screen sharing because I couldn't unmute myself while I was screen sharing. But my name is Dana Carls. I am a program specialist at the Science Museum of Minnesota.
Thanks, Dana. And it looks like we've lost the last person, so we'll move forward. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I think it's just helpful to have a sense in this discussion of who's all involved. So today we will be talking about the Inspire CT project and what that is, because that's what brings us at our group from the Science Museum into this computational thinking space and learning with all of you today. And we'll share how we have approached professional development through that project. And then discuss with you all what's changed in the landscape of professional learning and what stayed the same, and take some time to do some group imagining of what could be. And I will hand it over to Mahmoud.
Thank you. I'd like to start by speaking just a little bit about the Inspire CT project without diving into the full scope of the history from like 2008 on. But we, as a museum, have had longstanding relationships with the Cargill Foundation, as well as Minneapolis Public Schools and Hopkins Public Schools. And after we concluded a project based around engineering, we spoke to a number of teachers and district leaders to ask where the next layer of support should be placed. And what we heard over and over again was computer science and how can we support computer science education. And for us, that really took the form of engaging with computational thinking and computational thinking practices to really show how it's already happening in the classroom and ways that we can build upon that kind of work. And then it looks like we lost the slides. Okay, no worries. Thank you. So asking how can we support computer science education and speaking to a number of teachers, if we look at the next slide, this was some of the different rationale that we were hearing, right, as to why computer science and computational thinking should be the next layer of support. One being that computer science, computational thinking, all of these huge words and devices can be intimidating if it's your first time kind of interacting with, well, what does it mean to really teach debugging? What does it mean to understand algorithmic design? So mitigating and minimizing that kind of intimidation factor when we're working with teachers to really demystify computer science and computational thinking. Another one was that teachers saw CS/CT as something new, but that it would, especially over time, become more of a fundamental literacy, right? That it's something that is currently impacting and will continue to impact their students in ways yet unimagined. And so they saw a lot of importance to teaching this new content area. And then a third one is that teachers are really looking for different ways to not necessarily teach computer science and computational thinking skills as something separate, right? But looking for ways to integrate it into core content areas. So how do you teach computational thinking while you're teaching a math curriculum? How do you teach computational thinking as you're working to build SEL skills as well? And so these were some of the different motivations that we had going into the Inspire CT project. And that leads us to, if we go to the next slide, some of the different goals that we had as we were starting out this work. Being able to build capacity in terms of all of these new content areas and all of these new practices, both within the museum, but then also among educators outside of the museum. Really continuing to nurture those relationships between the museum, Minneapolis Public Schools, Hopkins Public Schools, to keep CS and CT education like a priority, and co-designing authentic instruction, relatable instruction, so that it's not a relationship such that we as a museum are coming to educators and saying, this is what we think should be happening in the classroom, but that it is more of a, I hate business speak, but synergistic relationship among partners. And all of that led us to really question, what is our philosophy around professional development? And for that, I am going to give it up to Emily.
Thank you. So we've been doing professional development in the STEM education group department at the Science Museum for a long time and have found a lot of success in that. And we're often checking in with teachers, surveying teachers, and hearing things from them about how they feel respected and treated like professionals, and that they aren't always getting that in professional development in other places. And so it caused us to really pause and think about, what is our philosophy? What is important and to us that underlies that and allows those outcomes to be possible. So these are a few of the things that are involved in that. One is to explicitly recognize teachers' expertise. We, as the facilitators, are bringing expertise to that space of learning, but every teacher in that room is also bringing an enormous amount of expertise about teaching, about their students, about what's happening in their own communities. And all of that is essential to having a really successful implementation. The next thing is to make the content as relevant as possible. We want to be sure that anything we're teaching or units we're providing are things that are really useful to teachers and useful to their students as well. So that's always a focus. And from the time we're beginning to develop a session, or a series of professional development, to really think about how are we doing that and to gather information to inform that process. And we want to provide learning that can immediately be used in classrooms. So not just theory around what we're doing, although that might be part of it, but really concrete things that an educator can take directly from the learning session right back to their classroom or whatever other learning environment they work in. And then we really intentionally scaffold the learning. So we're really thoughtful about where we start the day or the week or whatever the hour, whatever the length of time is. But also, if we're offering a different series of steps for a teacher to move through, how do those build on each other without duplicating each other? And then finally, in the case of CT, it's really important to us to understand and communicate why and how CT is valuable. Why are we asking teachers for their time to be spent with us learning about this? And why is it worth the classroom time to implement the things we're learning about? So as an example of that, when we do a 1-hour introduction to computational thinking session with educators, we really spend a good amount of that time thinking about what are the reasons that brought you to the session today, about why is computational thinking important to you, and then what are additional reasons that might layer on from the time we're spending together. And so these are some of the categories of reasons that we discuss and come up with in sessions like that to really ground and set a strong foundation for further learning.
All right. And Emily mentioned in the last slide that that is one of the ways that we communicate to teachers and understand people's motivations for jumping into CT and CT education. And I wanted to lay out some of the additional ways that we've approached professional development over the course of this project, over the life of this project. One being those intro to CT sessions where there's an hour-long introductory session, right, to really introduce PD in an approach or CT in an approachable way. And importantly, to show teachers how these different computational thinking practices already manifest in the things that they're doing in a classroom. The way that in math, they're decomposing different problems already. In ELA, they're abstracting information, and that there's these things carry over into computational thinking and computer science as well. We also use our intro to CT residencies as another way to interact with teachers, and our residency model is that over the course of 4 days, an instructor from the Science Museum is in a teacher's classroom doing those introductory activities with teachers, with students, some unplugged activities, and really modeling different pedagogical approaches for teaching computational thinking. And we've had the opportunity, the amazing opportunity to work very closely with teacher leaders within both school districts, where in those teacher leadership cohorts and summits, we're really doing some longer term professional development. It might happen a few times over the course of like weeks or months, right? And do some real deep dives into different aspects of computational thinking. And really working with those teachers to help build those resources, help build equity resources, curricular resources, things that can be used in the classroom to really jump into computational thinking education. And yeah, co-creating some of those different resources. So that's how we approached professional development, which brings us to a question.
Yeah, so all of our work and really being in that space, working with educators, has led us to ask ourselves and others, where do we go from here, and how has the landscape shifted or is continuing to shift? We've seen really significant differences over the past 5 years or so. Some examples of those shifts are just more concerns about student mental health and social emotional learning, but also teachers' mental health and how they are being cared for and caring for themselves. We've seen an increasing need and desire for an educator community. So we're hearing from our teacher leaders who participate in the summits that one of the things that's a highlight of the summit for them is the opportunity to connect with fellow teachers across schools and districts. And that they have an interest in continuing to collaborate with fellow teachers. Often during our trainings, educators are sparking conversations or ideas for the classroom, and they have a really strong interest to continue to hear from each other about how those things are going, or to talk about ideas from people who have had a shared learning experience with them. And then one more example of a shift is that the Computer Science Education Advancement Act in Minnesota, of course, and the CS Working Group's recommendations have really changed the direction and moved things more strongly in the direction of requiring more or seeing a need and a structure for more professional development in the coming years. So those are just a few of the things we've been noticing, and we just want to open the space if anyone would like to add to that list or comment on things you've noticed as well or are feeling yourself. Okay, hand it over to Mahmoud for our next section.
All right. That all brought us to the question of how we can reimagine professional learning. And for a little peek behind the curtain, you know those music videos from like the 70s and 80s where the entire thing is in black and white, then the guitar solo comes up and then it becomes in color. That's the effect we were going for by using professional development up until this portion, and now using the term professional learning to really look at it as a process of continual improvement in education and all of those things. But this is one of those kinds of questions that it's one of my favorite types of questions because it opens up more questions than it does answers. And so here are some of the additional questions that have come up over the course of thinking, like what needs to be reimagined here? How can this shift in a way that bears a lot of fruit for everybody involved? And if we go to the next slide, yes. So these are 5 of the questions that have come up for us, and there's definitely more. And I think a lot of room for discussion here, which is one, in what ways can we change how professional learning is delivered? And this, I think, saw a lot of change in 2020, particularly, right? 2020 on, where a lot of PD that used to be done in person now can be done virtually, now can be done in a hybrid capacity. But are there other ways that we can change how professional learning is delivered? Another huge one is, how can we use professional learning as a way to build community among educators? There's so much cool stuff that's happening, sure, in the metro, but also in like over here in Minnesota, over here in Minnesota, over here in Minnesota, right? So how can we use professional learning as a way to build a lot more of those connections, and what are the community hubs that we can really interact with and really build those connections with? This is a big, like, how do I know that the blue you see is the same as the blue that I see? But what should our motivations be in professional learning? Is it to get that content down? Is it to find, there's so many different ways to approach computer science and computational thinking, that what should our motivations be in building out different professional learning experiences? And in what other ways can we build on the introductory work that we've been doing? What content would be both interesting and supportive to teachers? It is a deeper dive into different programming languages, what teachers want and what they would like more support in, or is it more about the ethics within computing, right? Algorithmic biases, ways to kind of work against some of the worse tendencies among people. And how should professional learning be structured, which is such a big and open question that sadly I have no answer for. So this is what we kind of like to structure some additional discussion around. And I will mute myself in case anybody has thoughts on these 5 questions or any other question that isn't listed here.
Okay, we'll keep moving. Mahmoud, would you like to share some of the ideas around structure that we've talked about?
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the different things that we had been thinking about is, and this is something that came out of our work, particularly with Minneapolis and with Hopkins, is having a monthly check-in professional learning session where, for example, the first half might cover a particular piece of content, but then the second half is really an opportunity for teachers to continue building relationships with one another, seeing what's happening in other classrooms and sharing, like, I had this idea a month ago and I put it on the shelf and I'd love to come back to it and have somebody to be a thought partner with. But then also in terms of the structure and the motivation of professional learning, another one that we've played around with is using the unconference model as a way to have teachers determine what the content is, and be able to, one, share with one another, two, communicate those relationships, but then three, really walk in with thoughts and walk out with something tangible and generative that they can take back to their classrooms immediately. And it might not be a finished product, right? It might not be something that is ready to be jumped into right away, but to at least like be able to work in the same space at the same time with people and see what's happening within their classrooms, and see where things can really be built up from there. So that's 2 of the ideas that these questions have kind of moved us to in terms of approaching professional learning, while not losing the critical aspects of professional development, right? That really, the piece that builds on content, the way that builds, the thing that builds different forms of competencies, but really looking at whatever motivations for professional learning should be as opposed to professional development. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you. And around that question of motivations, we want to hear from you, whether you're here with us today or maybe viewing the recording at a later date. What makes a professional learning experience worthwhile, and what do you find valuable? So I'm going to drop a link in the chat to a form where we'd love to hear from you on the response to that question. And again, it's what makes a professional learning experience worthwhile, and what do you find valuable? And with that, we'll wrap up our time together this morning. Thank you so much for viewing and your attention to this question, and we hope to continue collaborating in the future. If you'd like to reach either Mahmoud or myself, you can reach us both at the email address inspirect@smm.org. And thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day and conference.